CrowdStrike updates, Meta ousts Sextortion ring, malware campaign using fake W2 forms, GitHub deleted and private repos can be accessed, GitHub accounts found distributing malware, Windows SmartScreen flaw, North Korean APT-45 shifts from espionage to ransomware. All this and more in today's episode of the Cybersecurity Digest. Hello and welcome back to the Cybersecurity Digest, where our goal is to help you stay informed so you can stay secure. We made it! It's Friday, July 24th, and I'm your host, Greg. To our first-time listeners, welcome, and to my return listeners, welcome back. As always, I appreciate you taking time out of your day to check out the show. If these episodes have helped you stay informed, I would greatly appreciate it if you would please share this show out with a colleague or someone you know who likes staying up to date on cybersecurity news. Before we dive into today's topics, some quick show updates. We've officially hit over 200 listens to the podcast. I just want to express my gratitude for those of you who have tuned in. Thank you so much. I am extremely grateful for your time and your continued support. This show is something I decided to do for fun outside of work. When I started, I didn't realize how much time it would take, and it turns out it has taken significantly more time than I originally thought. That being said, I am not quitting. Rather, the show's going to have a new cadence going forward. I'm going to be changing the show up here from 3 days a week to 2 days a week, with releases coming out on Tuesdays and Fridays will be the new release cadence. Due to this change in cadence, there's going to be some changes to the show format. I'm going to divide the show into 2 to 3 sections depending on if there is any news from CISA. The sections of the show will be as follows. The first section in the show going forward is going to be the notable news section. This is for the latest news in the cybersecurity space. After that will be the Prevalent Patches section. This is going to be a quick run through of patches that have released since our last episode. And then finally, we will have our CISA Corner. It's no longer going to be the CISA Kev Corner. This is going to be for any CISA advisories as well as additions to the CISA Known Exploited Vulnerability Catalog. I hope you all will enjoy the new format, and I'm hoping that it helps you better digest the content that I'm presenting to you. Thank you again so much for all of you who have tuned in thus far. If you have any feedback regarding this new format, please let me know on either Podbean or on YouTube. All right, on to our first section, Notable News. Diving into today's first story, as expected, threat actors continue to take advantage of the CrowdStrike event. Since our last podcast, CrowdStrike has posted their preliminary post-incident review, 3 more blog posts discussing threat actors taking advantage of the situation to push malware, as well as a malicious actor claiming to have stolen information from the security giant. First of these items mentioned is the preliminary post-incident report, which was published from CrowdStrike. This was published on Wednesday. In this report, they dive into what happened to cause the faulty channel file to be pushed last Friday. To quote the incident report, and I quote, "On July 19th, 2024, 2 additional IPC template instances were deployed. Due to a bug in the content validator, one of the 2 template instances passed validation despite containing problematic content data. Based on the testing performed before the initial deployment of the template type, on March 5th, 2024, trust in the checks performed in the content validator and previous IPC template instance deployments, these instances were deployed into production. When received by the sensor and loaded into the content interpreter, problematic content in channel file 291 resulted in an out-of-bounds memory read triggering an exception. This unexpected exception could not be gracefully handled, resulting in a Windows operating system crash or a blue screen of death." End quote. To read more about this report as well as how CrowdStrike plans to prevent such incidents from occurring in the future, please find a link to the full report in the show notes. In other CrowdStrike news, CrowdStrike's counter-adversary operations, that's such a cool name, reported yesterday of a spear phishing campaign that was targeting a German entity. The attackers used a fake CrowdStrike crash report installer that was hosted on a website impersonating a legitimate German entity. The website, created shortly after the CrowdStrike Falcon sensor update, used JavaScript masquerading as jQuery v3.7.1 to download and deobfuscate the installer. The report stated that the installer contained CrowdStrike branding, German localization, as well as required a password for installation. The fake installer, named CrowdStrike Crash Reporter Setup 8.r3.exe, after executing, would start the installation, prompting the victim to input a specific backend server. Failure to provide this information results in the user receiving an error. CrowdStrike reported that in addition to the installer, the malware includes a csmon8.dat file as well as a java8 runtime.exe file. The installer was observed using anti-forensic techniques to evade detection. As of this recording, CrowdStrike had not been able to recover the final payload. However, the report has several IOCs, or indicators of compromise, related to this specific attack. To read more about this specific malware as well as review those IOCs, please check out the show notes. In other CrowdStrike news, on July 23, 2024, CrowdStrike Intelligence identified a phishing domain, CrowdStrike-office365.com. This website was used to impersonate CrowdStrike to deliver malicious zip and RAR files containing an MSI loader. This loader executes Luma Stealer packed with Cypherit. The domain was registered shortly after a fix was deployed for an issue in CrowdStrike's Falcon sensor on July 19, 2024. The report states that this phishing campaign is linked to a June 2024 Luma Stealer distribution campaign where advanced social engineering techniques like spam floods and voice phishing, or phishing like we've talked about in previous episodes, were used. The MSI loader displays a decoy installation and extracts a self-extracting RAR file, or an SFX file. This contains a nullsoft scriptable installer system and SIS installer with the name of symposiumtaiwan.exe. This installer includes fragments of a legitimate AutoIt executable and a compiled AutoIt script. The AutoIt loader is heavily obfuscated and contains two shellcodes for 32-bit and 64-bit systems, implementing the RC4 algorithm to decrypt the final payload. The final payload is an RC4 encrypted and LZNT1 compressed Luma Stealer sample which contacts a command and control server. The same command and control server domain was observed in a recent spam flood and phishing campaign, suggesting the activity is likely attributable to the same unnamed threat actor. Lastly, on the CrowdStrike phishing attack front here, on Tuesday, CrowdStrike Intelligence identified a malicious zip file containing a Python-based information stealer named Connexio. This file was distributed shortly after a content update for CrowdStrike's Falcon sensor on July 19, 2024, the day that will go down in history. The zip file, named CrowdStrikeFalcon.zip, masquerades as a Falcon update. The file, CrowdStrikeFalcon.exe, within the archive is a self-extracting RAR file that executes the Connexio information stealer. The Connexio malware collects system information, the system's external IP addresses, as well as data from multiple web browsers. It resolves its command and control servers by making HTTP GET requests to specific pastebin URLs. The readme.txt file in the archive instructs victims to disable Windows Defender and execute the malicious executable. CrowdStrike Intelligence has provided a Yara role to detect common strings associated with Connexio. They have also detailed indicators of compromise and mapped Connexio activity to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. If you'd like to read recommendations for protection against this activity, as well as review these IOCs for yourself, they are linked in the show notes. Alright, to round out our CrowdStrike news here today, lastly on July 24, 2024, a hacktivist named US DoD claimed on breach forums to have linked CrowdStrike's entire threat actor list, as well as an entire IOC list, or indicators of compromise. They provided a link to download the alleged data and a sample CSV file containing fields like adversary aliases, status, last active dates, and regions of origin. The sample data included last active dates up to June 2024, while CrowdStrike's Falcon portal had more recent dates. This suggested when the actor may have obtained the information. CrowdStrike states in their report, and I quote, "The threat intel data noted in this report is available to tens of thousands of customers, partners, and prospects, and hundreds of thousands of users. Adversaries exploit current events for attention and gain. We remain committed to sharing data with the community." End quote. US DoD also claimed to obtain databases from companies in the oil industry as well as pharmaceutical. Since the data obtained is available to CrowdStrike customers, it is unclear where this data, if the claims are true, was obtained. It is worth noting that the group has a history of exaggerating claims to boost their reputation, such as a previous hack and leak operation that was later debunked as web scraping. All right, let's give CrowdStrike a little break here. In non-CrowdStrike related news, Meta has taken significant steps to combat financial sextortion scams, particularly those orchestrated by cyber criminals known as Yahoo Boys. In their recent efforts, Meta removed 63,000 Instagram accounts in Nigeria that were involved in these scams, including a coordinated network of around 2,500 accounts linked to a group of 20 individuals. These scammers primarily target adult men in the United States using fake accounts to mask their identities. Additionally, Meta removed 7,200 assets on Facebook, including accounts, pages, and groups that were providing tips and resources for conducting scams. These assets included 1,300 Facebook accounts, 200 Facebook pages, and 5,700 Facebook groups. The scammers shared scripts, guides, and collections of photos to use for creating fake accounts. Meta's systems have been updated to automatically block attempts from these groups if they are to return. They also continue to support law enforcement by responding to legal requests and alerting them of imminent harm. Meta funds and supports programs like Project Boost to train law enforcement agencies worldwide in processing and acting on reports of such crimes. Meta also highlighted in the report that they're focused on preventative measures. They have developed new signals to identify accounts potentially engaging in sextortion. If you are interested to hear more about this style of crime, as well as more about these threat actors, the Yahoo Boys, Jack Rhysider did a fantastic job covering similar scams in episode 141 of Darknet Diaries titled The Pig Butcher. Links to both this report from Meta as well as the mentioned Darknet Diaries episode can be found in the show notes. On Tuesday, researchers from Rapid7 posted a report after discovering an ongoing campaign that has been targeting W-2 form searches. The report states, and I quote, "Rapid7 has recently observed a campaign targeting users searching for W-2 forms using Microsoft search engine Bing." End quote. The report goes on to state that users are directed to a fake IRS website which prompts them to download a malicious JavaScript file. This JavaScript file downloads and executes a Microsoft Software Installer or MSI package, which drops and executes a DLL containing the brute Ratel badger. The brute Ratel badger downloads and injects the Latrodectus malware. Latrodectus is a stealthy backdoor used to query information, execute remote commands, and download additional payloads. In the article, Rapid7 makes several recommendations for how to address these. If you would like the full list of IOCs as well as these recommendations in the report is linked in the show notes below. All right, moving right along here. In some GitHub-related news, on Wednesday, Joe Leon with Truffle Security Co. published an article that piqued my interest titled, "Anyone Can Access Deleted and Private Repository Data on GitHub." In the article, Joe discusses a significant security vulnerability in GitHub. The attack vector was given the name Cross-Fork Object Reference by Truffle Security. This vulnerability allows access to sensitive data from deleted and private repositories through their forks. Even if a repository or fork is deleted, the commit data remains accessible if the commit hash is known. This poses a major security risk for organizations using GitHub. The article provides several examples to illustrate the issue. For instance, data committed to a fork remains accessible even after the fork is deleted. Similarly, commits made to a repository before it is open-sourced can be accessed via the public repository. The article also highlights a real-world scenario where a private key committed to a repository was still accessible through a fork after the repository was deleted. Some of the key takeaways Truffle Security highlights are as follows. Once a fork exists, any commit to that repository network will exist forever. They also highlighted that GitHub's architecture requires these design flaws. To check out the full article for yourself, as well as review some of the ways Truffle Security can help you scan your repos for secrets, as well as videos about these exploits, head to the article linked in the show notes. In further GitHub news on Wednesday, Checkpoint Research published research on a network of GitHub accounts it had identified distributing malware or malicious links. This research was quite fascinating to read. In it, Checkpoint states that traditional methods of malware distribution, such as email, are heavily monitored, so attackers have shifted to using GitHub repositories. The threat actors create networks of ghost accounts that distribute malware through malicious links and encrypted archives, making these accounts appear legitimate by engaging in normal activities like forking and starring repositories. This approach is helping them evade detection and lure victims into downloading malicious content. Checkpoint also highlights in the research that a notable campaign involved in the distribution of the Atlanta Stealer, a malware that steals user credentials and cryptocurrency wallets. This campaign was highly effective, infecting over 1,300 victims in just 4 days. The malicious links were often distributed via Discord channels, targeting users looking to increase their followers on social media platforms like YouTube, Twitch, and Instagram. The network structure allows it to quickly adapt and replace compromised components, ensuring continuous operation despite GitHub's efforts to take down malicious repositories. The Stargazer's Ghost Network, operated by a group dubbed Stargazer Goblin, functions as a malware link distribution as a service. This network uses compromised and newly created GitHub accounts to distribute various malware families. To read the full research for way more detail than I am providing you, as well as IOCs, please check out the show notes. Alright, on to the next story here. FortiGuard Labs threat research team published on Tuesday of a Stealer campaign that has been taking advantage of CVE 2024-21412. CVE 2024-21412 is a Windows SmartScreen flaw. FortiGuard Labs stated that this vulnerability allows remote attackers to bypass security warnings and deliver malicious files. Attackers including Water Hydra, Luma Stealer, and Medusa Stealer have exploited this flaw to spread malware. The attack chain involves luring victims to click a crafted link, downloading a LNK file, which then downloads an executable file containing an HTA script. This script decodes and decrypts PowerShell code to retrieve URLs, decoy PDF files, and a malicious shellcode injector, ultimately injecting the final stealer into legitimate processes. For a full write-up on how this vulnerability works, as well as for IOCs, please find FortiGuard Labs research linked in the show notes. It is worth noting that this vulnerability was patched in a Windows security update back in February of this year. It is probably worth checking if you or your organization have patched for this vulnerability due to it being observed in the wild. Alright, moving right along here, RE Security reported on Wednesday of a chain of vulnerabilities that have been used by threat actors to exploit organizations running unpatched versions of ServiceNow. Threat actors have been observed exploiting these ServiceNow vulnerabilities to breach government agencies and private firms, leading to data theft. Despite security updates released on July 10, 2024, many systems remain vulnerable. The flaw allows unauthenticated users to perform remote code execution. Researchers published detailed write-ups and exploits which threat actors quickly leverage to find and exploit vulnerable instances of in the wild. RE Security reports that attackers use payload injectors to check server responses and database contents, leading to the dumping of user lists and account credentials. The flaws have garnered significant attention on underground forums, indicating high interest from the cybercrime community. ServiceNow has released fixes for all 3 of these vulnerabilities, and users are urged to apply the patches immediately to secure their systems. If your organization uses ServiceNow, please ensure that you are patched for these. These sound really bad. If you would like to read more about this, please find the full research in the show notes below. All right, last up in our notable news section for today, Mandiant reported yesterday on APT-45. APT-45 is a North Korean cyber operator who's been active since 2009. Initially focused on espionage against government and defense sectors, APT-45 has expanded into financially motivated operations, including ransomware development. The group is distinct from other North Korean operators due to its unique malware genealogy and frequent targeting of critical infrastructure. Mandiant's report highlights APT-45's evolving targets, reflecting North Korea's shifting priorities. To read more about these shifting priorities, I've also linked a CISA Alert about this threat actor group if you'd like to read more. You can find that in the show notes below the Mandiant report. APT-45 was the group that had targeted nuclear facilities, financial institutions, and healthcare sectors, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. APT-45's operations are believed to support North Korea's geopolitical interests and generate funds for the regime. Mandiant assesses with high confidence that APT-45 is state-sponsored, likely linked to North Korea's Reconnaissance General Bureau. The group's activities have been reported under various names, including Andriel and Lazarus Group. APT-45's continued focus on both intelligence collection and financially motivated cybercrimes underscores its role in North Korea's cyber strategy. All right, everybody, it is time to move on to our next section, Prevalent Patches. Welcome to the Prevalent Patches section, where I quickly tell you about some patches that have come out since our last episode. The links to these patches or the advisories I will be mentioning will be in the show notes. First up, on Tuesday, Google published an update for Google Chrome that had resolved 22 security vulnerabilities. The severity of these vulnerabilities range from low to high. Next up, on Tuesday, Docker published a security advisory fixing an Auth bypass and privilege escalation vulnerability. The vulnerability was originally fixed in January 2019, however, the fix was not included in Docker Engine version 19.03 or newer. This was identified in April, and Docker patched that this month. If you are in the industrial control system space, you should be aware of a security advisory Siemens published earlier this week. In the advisory, Siemens fixed several vulnerabilities that impacted CPC I-85 and PsyCore base system. These CVEs have a CVSS v4 rating of 9.3 and 7.1 respectively. I recommend that if you use these products, you check out the advisory for more details. And lastly, receiving an almost perfect 9.9 out of 10 on the CVSS scale is a Progress vulnerability. Progress reported of a critical insecure deserialization vulnerability in their Telerik reporter server versions prior to 2024 Q2. This vulnerability does allow for remote code execution, so if you or your organization use this product, please check and make sure that you are patched as soon as possible. All right, it is time for the show's final segment, the CISA Corner. On Wednesday, CISA published an advisory regarding Bind 9. The advisory states that there are multiple vulnerabilities with Bind 9 that could cause a denial of service condition. All right, everyone, thank you so much for tuning into today's episode of the Cybersecurity Digest. I hope you really enjoyed the new format. As mentioned earlier, all links and articles mentioned in this show are in the show notes. Additionally, you can head to thecybersecuritydigest.com to find all of our links, as well as links to this podcast and your podcast platform of choice. If you have liked this episode, please consider sharing with someone you know that would like this show or benefit from this information. Lastly, I would greatly appreciate it if you could leave this show a rating in your podcast platform of choice. I hope, yet again, that you enjoy this new format. Just to kind of recap real quick, the new release cadence is going to be on Tuesdays and Fridays. All right, before you head on out here, I have your Friday dad joke. I saw a bird eating avocado toast the other day. It was a millennial falcon. All right, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, stay informed to stay secure.